our community. We are grateful to be in this place, a part of this community, and to honor the culture, traditions, and resilience of the Tlingit people. Kunoshish.
Thank you, Ms. Hale. Madam Clerk, will you call roll?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Walahidoc.
Here.
Ms. Atkinson.
Here.
Ms. Wall.
Present.
Mr. Smith.
Here.
Mr. Kelly.
Here.
Mr. Bryson.
Present.
Deputy Mayor Hill.
Here.
Just to note that Ms. Huskandies is not with us. And Mayor Weldon.
Here.
A quorum is present.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. So under special order of business, we'll talk about the flood mitigation update by Ms. Kester. So we had a very busy, productive trip going to Washington, D.C. We were joined by Jackie Peda, who is the first vice president of Central Council Tlingit Haida. We are also joined by Sabrina Grubitz, who is their public safety officer. So we got the best response from Army Corps of Engineers and the Forest Service, but without giving anything else away, we do have the Army Corps visiting us. I'll go to Ms. Kester. Madam City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor Weldon. You are correct. It was a whirlwind, but very productive 48 hours. While we were there, of course, Governor Dunleavy submitted a disaster declaration request to the President of the United States. That gets pushed through FEMA as a kind of a clearinghouse for recommendations. And it just so happens that the FEMA administrator who reports to the person who makes those recommendations was in Juneau visiting with Tlingit and Haida and also Deputy Manager Barr. So I think it's safe to say that they definitely have our attention, but that is a decision by the president. So if there's constituents out there who want to advocate, that is where that advocacy can go towards. I can assure you that our delegation is busy advocating. I don't think the letter had been sent for 5 minutes before there was a joint letter from our delegation to the president requesting that disaster declaration. So of course that disaster declaration will free up more individual assistance for our homeowners. It just about doubles the amount of public assistance that homeowners have. And it will also make CBJ eligible for FEMA funding and funding in the upcoming in a disaster assistance bill that is percolating its way through Congress with hopes of something that can be passed this fall. The second item that was very useful that the governor and President Peterson submitted was a request for technical assistance from the Army Corps of Engineers flood fighting team. That request has to come from a higher level of government. So the tribe and the state both submitted that request, and they moved very quickly once they heard from us. And I'm pleased to say that the flood fighting team is here in Juneau as we speak. That was the last meeting I jumped off of. They are meeting with our engineering department, meeting with DOT, meeting with National Weather Service, and talking through some of the short and midterm flood fighting options. And I will end this update with a little bit of information on that. But first, I want to talk a little bit more about some of the meetings we had at DOC in DC. As the mayor mentioned, it was a very productive meeting with the Army Corps. We had everyone from both their civil side and their flood fighting side. If you recall, we're approaching this in kind of a three-pronged approach. We've got our possible immediate need of flood fighting this fall with Suicide Basin refilling. We've got what I call our midterm need, but it's still a pretty near-term need of flood fighting for next year's event. And this is why we need to do the inundation mapping, and we need to, put some real thought and effort into that. Those two things, Army Corps of Engineers flood fighting is helping with. And then the long-term piece is the general investigation study. And that's the ordinance, of course, you have before you tonight. That would provide the research and the feasibility study into the long-term fix. So again, right now we're working on implementing a plan for implementing that near-term fix so we can buy ourselves time for a longer fix. Some of the good news from Army Corps of Engineers, is that, we were able to kind of escalate the project. I think no one really was aware that there is the possibility of a second flood this fall. So we got their attention, which was great. We learned that for this new project, a new start for the long-term study, we will need a congressionally directed spending or some congressionally directed new start for a project. So that's something that we, CBJ, will be advocating for. So in addition to the $3 million that you're appropriating today, we need a minimum $500,000 to in a federal piece of federal legislation to start our project. So that's kind of one of the pieces that we're advocating for. We also met with Senator Sullivan, and he sent a letter to the Appropriations Committee advocating for funding for FEMA and for housing and development in this continuing resolution anomaly that you've heard me talk about. And I don't have a great grasp on exactly what that is, but it's basically plussing up all the disaster response programs in the wake of disasters that have happened over the past year. So we need that federal disaster declaration to be eligible for those programs, and we need there to be enough funding in that pot to cover our needs. And that's why it's so important to get Senator Sullivan's support in plussing up those programs, which he has provided. And he's been supportive of that disaster funding. Another highlight just of our meeting with Sullivan is he essentially, as he said, has double oversight of the Army Corps. And I think, we've seen a really responsive Army Corps of Engineers, and just want to give a shout out because I'm sure that has helped. We also met with staff from Congresswoman Peltola's office. A little bit of a squirrel, but they talked a lot about insurance, disaster insurance for homeowners for all types of disasters. And of course, in Southeast, landslides, earth movement is really important. So long-term, we will be following up on that. We had a nice long meeting with Senator Murkowski. She was super realistic with us about our chances of, getting kind of big tranches of funding for flood fighting or for our general investigation study. I think she was pretty wary about the Corps just taking a very long time and spending a ton of money on any of their projects. So important that we enter into that with our eyes open. One thing Senator Murkowski was able to do was ensure that the local, that Army Corps has enough budget authority in their existing budget to be able to offer us technical assistance. So even though they were asked to do it by the governor and by President Peterson, they have to have budget. And she scrounged that out very quickly. And again, that's why they are here helping us, because they have that budget authority. I just want to also note that in addition to spending an hour with us on Friday, she was in Juneau and she visited with National Weather Service and followed up locally. So really is wrapping her head around all of the issues so that she can help us. We also met with the House Appropriations staff. That's the staff group that's pulling together this continuing resolution anomaly. What was important about that is that they understood the needs of a small community like Juneau and can think of us when they're pulling that together and making sure those programs are plussed up enough to include us. We had a productive meeting with the U.S. Forest Service. I would say the U.S. Forest Service definitely, wanted to help. I mean, they really, value that asset that is the Mendenhall Glacier, and they said something that was impactful for me, which was it's really important that people don't fear the lands around them, because when you start to fear those lands, you lose that respect and reverence for them. And so they wanted to be part of a solution and are actively looking for funding in addition to, being part of any type of permitting solution that could happen, long-term solution that could happen in the national forest. We ended our trip with a meeting at HUD, and the reason HUD, because they have the Community Development Block Grant Program and a disaster assistance program. So they have a program specifically for providing disaster assistance for communities and for individuals. And definitely have some rocks to look under there. We had, of course, Jackie Peta, who, in addition to being first vice president in Tlingit and Haida, is the executive director of Tlingit and Haida Regional Housing Authority, and a longtime DC, knows her way around DC. I think she probably spent 20 years there. So she's able to leverage those relationships and help us out. And I just before I end on my update from our DC trip, I just want to say how important it was to be a united front, the tribe and the city, and we both can tap onto different resources, and just it was really apparent that we got everyone who we needed to be in the room because we were able to provide that unified front. So I think I'm going to pause about the DC kind of trip update. And then I do have one more piece to talk to you about just the flood fighting in general, but I've spoken to myself in a small square in my cell phone. So Mayor Weldon, I'll pause.
All right, any questions, Ms. Kester, on the DC trip and what we learned there, other than Jackie Payton knows everybody? And it was funny at the National Weather Service when the main guy said, and what does the tribe think of that? And we could just go, well, here's the first vice president. So anyway, Ms. Hale.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And first, I just want to thank from the bottom of my heart, Madam Mayor and Manager Kester, for making that whirlwind trip, which is not easy. So thank you so much for so wonderfully representing Juneau and bringing home the bacon. I mean, it's really, really exciting that the Corps is here. I know that we've talked and we've heard from other people who are interested in at what point will a team of local experts, which we have a lot of, sort of be formed. And kind of related to that, and it's something we've also mentioned before, is do we have plans? As an outgoing assembly member, I'd like to do everything I can to get you the additional resources you need from a staff perspective, because Madam Manager and Deputy Manager Barr, you're carrying an incredibly heavy load, this load, as well as running the city. So it's related, someone maybe even that could manage a group of locals. So that's my question.
Yeah,
Ms.
so
Kester.
thank you. I think there's really two parts to that. There's two questions. And the first question is, when are you going to have local experts involved? First, I want to let you know that anyone, please, if you have expertise to offer, you can email that flood response, or of course, email me or Deputy Manager Barr. And we have been working, of course, with National Weather Service, University of Alaska, DOT. In fact, I just left the meeting with both of those agencies. So we are definitely engaging those people. I think there's kind of two teams. There's one team that's flood fighting, and that's really has to be focused just because of the time frame. And then there's a second team that's more longer term solutions. And I see a lot. Of course, there's room for all of our local expertise, and we need those experts when it comes to both of those. But I see the long term solution needing just the necessity of how complex it is, needing to have that local touch. But I will be honest with you, my full attention right now is on flood fighting, just because of the immediacy. And then the second question you had was, do you need additional resources? There is no question that there will be additional resources needed. I mean, that's going to be the second part of my update about flood fighting. I don't know exactly what those look like, but I certainly could see, I mean, we've talked before about a project manager. This is the highest priority right now in engineering, but of course, lots of competing priorities. So I do think that at some point, we would be funding underneath, that kind of flood fighting, disaster assistance, some staffing needs. So I'm sorry that I haven't brought that to you yet. It's just moving so quickly, and it's so hard to know what we need. I think, the Army Corps of Engineers is going to be here all week and meeting with staff and touring the river. And I think we're going to have a much better idea of what we need after they've spent the week here.
Thank you, Manager Kester. And I totally understand that you've got a lot on your plate. Thank you. I just want to express my support.
Thank you, Ms. Hale. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And also wanted to echo Ms. Hale's appreciation to you two, as well as our community partners, just for keeping this a high priority and putting in a lot of work and effort on that. So thank you two very much. Manager Kester, this may be too early, but because you're going to talk about flood fighting, I guess, are you able to talk about what type of information or support generally like the Army Corps may be able to provide to homeowners, or is it, anyway, is there going to be information that a individual property owner can take and, you know, try to plan around, or is it going to be more broadly, you know, community type guidance?
Thank you, Mr. Smith. That probably brings you right into flood fighting, Mrs. Kester. So go ahead with that report.
Okay, great. I will go ahead with that report, and I will weave in response to that question to the best of my ability. Keeping in mind, I have spent all of 1 hour with flood fighting team. I just want to foreshadow some expectations as we wrap our arms around this. So the good news is that Army Corps has flood fighting HECLA barriers stockpiled in Illinois. They can get to us in 3 weeks. All I need to do to pull that trigger is write a letter, and they will get put on a barge and they will be sent to us. They also will be able to help with us determining where to place those HECLA barriers. So that's going to be tremendous. That's what they're going to be working on all this week. The bad news part of that is, you know, fairly likely these barriers would need to be placed along much of the river, which I don't know that we have, you know, manpower or funding for, because they'll need to be filled with sand. We're talking 25,000 feet of HECLA barriers. They also, according to National Weather Service, need to be more than 4 feet high. 4 feet is, you know, that's the like nice little barrier that you just put down. Otherwise, you're building a pyramid, and that pyramid has not only triple the cost associated with it, but a 6-foot footprint. And, you know, placing those barriers, well, the Corps will advise us on that. That will be, you know, our work that we end up doing if we should end up doing that. And there's risk associated with that. And it's like huge risk, right? That we get it wrong, especially, you know, having limited information. But that is the work that we're doing right now, doing that risk assessment, right? We're looking at what the cost would be, how feasible it is, where we would place those if we had a limited amount of time to mobilize, assuming we have something before we're able to get mapping done and more inundation studies done. So the other piece of that's going to be really challenging is putting levies on people's private property, right? And so getting that legal access to people's private property along the river will be another huge barrier. So I want to foreshadow for you the potential cost, the potential risk, the potential difficulty, and let you know that we're working on all of those things. As you know, we have this meeting. There are engineers and DOT and National Weather Service and hydrologists talking through all of these things and thinking through them so that I can bring you a better proposal. But I do anticipate that I will need to be making some decisions in the short term. For example, do we pull the trigger on those HECLA barriers? And I will need to be getting your assistance in the near term on some of those bigger questions as far as how much we lean in on preparing for a fall event. So I just want to leave you with that kind of, I don't know if it's a reality check. I mean, we all knew it was going to be difficult, but I want to make sure that I'm foreshadowing some of those pain points that we will need to wrestle with in the near future. And then to Assemblymember Smith's question about, will the Corps be here to advise on individual property owners? I mean, I don't have an answer to that question because, like I said, I've spent about an hour with them today. I guess for me, it's very difficult for me to tell every single community member that they need to protect their own home. And don't worry, we're going to lean in and try to protect the community, even though that very well may be the right answer. So, you know, and maybe it's more effective for every homeowner to protect their own home. Maybe it's more cost effective. So those will be conversations that we're having. But I do feel like, you know, we either are all in to try to protect the community, or we tell the community, you know, here's what we can provide in advice to you while taking on no liability about your own individual situation.
All right, thank you for that report. Since it sounds like there'd be lots of meetings this week, I'm anticipating that we won't have a public meeting this week, but perhaps next week to at least catch people up where we are, even though we won't have answers. Is that something doable next week?
I would be happy to have a public meeting as soon as I have a clue, what, I think we just need to have more information. So I'm hesitant to commit to like a date certain, but give us a couple days to talk through with the Corps and we can make that happen.
All right, thank you for that. Ms. Hale and then Mr. Kelly.
Thank you very much, Madam Manager and Madam Mayor. I think in terms of a public meeting, because people have so many questions, I know how difficult it is to schedule a public meeting when you don't have all the information, but we won't have all the information. So I really do appreciate within a couple of days having a better idea of when we might be able to have that neighborhood meeting or that public meeting so that people can actually start to think about options. Because I know that people in the neighborhoods are forming groups, trying to figure out if they need to do things themselves, which then becomes, I think, quite dangerous because then it's all the sort of the consequences of all the individual actions that might affect the river. I mean, I know there's consequences no matter what we do. So thank you for considering that public meeting. And I guess my other thought, in terms of that 3 weeks, obviously, and I know that you're working on it this week very hard, making that decision if you order up those bags. Has there been any conversation or discussion about a cargo flight rather than shipping them on a barge?
Ms. Kester.
No, but that's because, like I said, I've spent a total of 1 hour with the flood fighting team because that's how long they've been in Juneau. So I do think that if I were to pull the trigger tomorrow and we could get them in 3 weeks, I mean, that gives us time.
Okay, Mr. Kelly.
Thank you. I kind of wanted to actually, I guess my question ends up being somewhat of a follow-up to Ms. Hale's question. And that is about the barriers themselves that would be coming up. I'm not sure if I don't have a picture in front of me of which ones would be the HECLA barriers. I'm concerned with any sort of barrier that we bring up that it would be able to withstand a current, because like that would be an issue if we did have another glacial outburst flood. This isn't like a normal flood that happens in a lot of other communities. So would these HECLA barriers be something that would be designed to withstand a current of water?
Well, first of all, I think the only barrier that we could get in time would be barriers that the Army Corps has stockpiled. So I don't think we've got a lot of choice as far as the type of barrier that we use. We reached out extensively to vendors over the last 2 weeks, and there are long lead times on some of these products. So it is what it is. That is also why we have the engineers here to provide that technical assistance. But I agree with you. I mean, I have concerns like that. I have concerns like the limited amount of barriers that we may be able to install. What happens, to any edge of that where we aren't able to install barriers. So all of these things are going to have to be analyzed in a risk analysis while the Corps is here.
Thank you.
Thank you. And one of the things that when we talk to the Army Corps in Washington, D.C., one of the things that makes us unique is we have current in the water. It's just not a passive flood. It's a flood of current. So thank you for that question, Mr. Kelly. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just kind of on the, flood information to homeowners, I guess, I know you're moving quickly, learning a lot rapidly, but anyway, any information, even if it's basic, may be helpful to folks to help them kind of figure out how to best protect their property and homes. And I don't know if you were asking for guidance on, how strong to lean in terms of action. I know you are leaning in heavily, but I would be in the lean in very hard type of thing to help folks out there. And anyway, just to pass that along. Thanks.
Thanks, Mr. Smith. So seeing no hands at the moment, I think we're going to continue on because there probably will be questions along the way. So Madam Manager, do you have any requests for agenda changes?
No.
So public participation on non-agenda items, Madam Clerk, I believe you said we had 2 sign up.
We do have 2 individuals signed up. Mr. Singletary said he's going to testify on one of the ordinances, and Mr. Matoika, I'm not sure. Let me find you in our list here. If you were wanting to speak, you should be unmuted now. So if this is the time that you wanted to speak on what you were wanting to testify about, Madam Mayor, do we have 3 minutes or how long?
Yes, so Mr. Motika, I think is the right way to
Motika.
say it.
So sorry.
You please state your name and area of town you live in for the record, and you have 3 minutes. And this is on non-agenda items.
Okay, I presume I'm talking about the agenda items, which is the 2 ordinances that you're considering. My name is Roman Motika. I live at 835 Dixon Street. This has been kind of a whirlwind of information, a lot to absorb. But I want to thank Madam Mayor, the Assembly, and Manager Kester for all their work in addressing which is a very difficult and stressful situation. This is regarding the effects of the Suicide Basin outburst floods and their mitigation. My background, I'm a retired research professor with University of Alaska, specializing in studying glaciers, including Mendenhall. I retired back in 2013, but I maintained an interest in glaciers since then. I have 3 specific comments or questions. Will there be a technical advisory committee of any kind to review proposals that are going to be submitted in response to the RFP that's being considered? And afterward to monitor the hydrologic modeling work. In addition, I share my wariness of the ACE. That committee could also work with ACE and help evaluate proposed mitigation measures. And as Assembly Member Deputy Mayor Hale mentioned, the CBJ staff recognize that there's much local expertise and have made efforts to contact them and elicit their advice. And I'm happy to send a list of people that I know of that might be considered. The last is, can we ensure that the studies of the Suicide Basin and the Mendenhall Glacier, which is the source of the problem currently, and the studies that are being currently conducted by scientists at UAS and other agencies, can they be adequately funded and perhaps expanded? Just as a reminder, cause and effect, if you put up barriers, it's going to change things all along the river. And one last conclusion, just a reminder that the driver of the current situation is climate change. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Motika. Any clarifying questions for Mr. Motika? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony tonight. Or today, sorry, not used to the daytime meetings. And Madam Clerk, our next one is after one of the, correct?
That is correct. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
All right, and Mr. Motika, you mentioned a list. If you would send that to floodresponse@juneau.gov, that would be helpful. Thank you. All right, with that, we will move to public hearing on ordinances. Item, I think it's 2, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is ordinance 2024-01, version B, large letter M as in Mary. An ordinance appropriating $3 million to the manager as local matching funds for a United States Army Corps of Engineers Glacier Outburst Flooding General Investigation Study. Funding provided by general funds.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Madam Manager.
This ordinance would appropriate $3 million as local matching funds for United States Army Corps of Engineers Glacier Outburst Flooding Investigation Study. In August 2024, the Mendenhall Valley was flooded by a glacial outburst flood caused by Suicide Basin. The 2024 flood levels exceeded previous flooding events, damaging over 300 residences in the area. This funding would contribute towards a study with the United States Army Corps of Engineers to determine flood mitigation solutions when the Suicide Basin ice dam releases water in the future. The Committee of the Whole reviewed this request at the September 9th, 2024 meeting. The Systemic Racism Review Committee reviewed this ordinance at the September 17th, 2024 meeting. The Assembly Finance Committee reviewed this ordinance at its September 18th, 2024 meeting. Staff are working on 2 additional pieces of legislation to reimburse the general fund for this appropriation, which will include $2 million from the Docks and Harbors Fisheries Land Terminal Purchase CIP and $1 million from the Restricted Budget Reserve. I recommend the Assembly hold public testimony and adopt this ordinance.
Thank you, Madam Manager. Any member of the public wish to speak to this ordinance?
Mr. Clinton Singletary had signed up, so we have unmuted him. And Mr. Singletary, you are allowed to speak at this time.
Mr. Singletary, please state your name and area of town you live in for the record, and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and Assembly. My name is Clinton Singletary. I live at 9352 Center Court off of Meander. We were impacted by the flood. I do want to start by expressing my support for the 2 funding ordinances that are up for adoption. However, my appreciation for these steps is diminished by what I see as apparent lack of action by the city following last year's flood. After last year's flood, there were several assembly meetings from August to November that discussed different elements of that flood. But the last assembly meeting I could find that discussed anything related to the flood was the November 6th Committee of the Whole meeting. In reviewing those minutes, there were several items that staff and the assembly noted would be discussed further at subsequent meetings. These items included a report from the NRCS, National Resource Conservation Service, which would have outlined mitigation programs that the city may have been eligible for. There was 2 separate Corps of Engineer programs, including feasibility studies that CBJ had requested of the Corps. There was an upcoming CBJ staff meeting with FEMA to discuss several possible grant options. There was also a list of established persons of contact with experts at the Corps and NRCS who are willing to answer further questions and be a resource. Following that meeting, running all the way through to June 24, so about 7 months, I could not find any assembly meeting where an update was provided on these items or any other flood-related discussion was even had. I emailed the assembly last week to inquire where each of these items ended. I haven't yet received a response. Not surprised there. You guys were busy last week. But my point in bringing all this up is that it's great that the assembly is once again pursuing involvement of the Corps and other options. I can't help but feel that the ball was dropped after last year's flood. We're essentially now a year behind. It appears that we're starting the mitigation research and Corps engagement process all over again. Around 300 homes were impacted this year, mine included. Those impacted are dealing with significant stress, fear of the future. Many are debating whether to even finish repairing their homes before the next flood happens. And that's assuming they have the finances to even complete the repairs, much less take steps to protect against the next flood event that may happen this fall. Had the assembly and staff continued the work that was started last year, I'd say there's a pretty solid chance the city and residents could have taken better and more informed steps to mitigate the impact of this year's flood. Instead, it appears that the city decided to take a wait and see approach. I hope the assembly and the city are serious now with pursuing a solution this time, and that they've had their wake-up call to action. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Any questions? Ms. Hale, remember these are clarified questions only. Ms. Hale.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Singletary, my question is whether you've had a chance to review the Public Works minutes and agendas. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. I did look through those. I did not see anything for that stretch of time. So possible I missed something.
Mr. Kelly.
Thank you. I was going to ask the same question as Madam Deputy Mayor, but I also wanted to I'll make my remaining statement offline. Thank you for your testimony.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony today, Mr. Singletary. Madam Clerk, do we have anybody else signed up?
Madam Mayor, Mr. Matoika was the only other person who signed up. So that is all public testimony at this time.
Okay. All right, thank you for that. So we'll bring it back to the assembly. Try to remember my order here. Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Let's see, sorry, I'm trying to figure out how to do it with my phone and the thing. I move that the Assembly adopt ordinance 2024-01, lowercase b, uppercase M, an ordinance appropriating $3 million to the manager as local matching funds for United States Army Corps of Engineer glacial outburst flooding general investigation study, funding provided by general funds, and I ask for unanimous consent.
Any objection? Seeing none, that motion passes. Item 3, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is ordinance 2024-01, small letter B and large letter N as in Nancy, an ordinance appropriating $100,000 to the manager for expanded inundation maps and hydrological modeling of the Mendenhall River, funding provided by general funds.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Madam Manager.
This ordinance would appropriate $100,000 of general funds for expanded inundation maps and hydrological modeling of the Mendenhall River. In August 2024, the Mendenhall Valley was flooded by a glacial outburst flood caused by Suicide Basin. We all know the damage that was provided in the area, over 300 residences. This funding would contribute towards mapping and hydrological modeling of the Mendenhall River to determine potential flood impacts in the future, with data collected to be used for mitigation solutions. The Committee of the Whole reviewed this request at the September 9, 2024 meeting. Systemic Racism Review Committee reviewed this ordinance at its September 17th meeting, and the Assembly Finance Committee reviewed this ordinance at its September 18th, 2024 meeting. I recommend the Assembly hold public testimony and adopt this ordinance.
Thank you, Madam Manager. Madam Clerk, did we have anybody sign up to testify on this ordinance?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We did not have anyone other than Mr. Singletary and Mr. Motika, and I'm sorry for mispronouncing that earlier, signed up to testify.
All right, thank you, Madam Clerk. So we'll bring it back to the assembly. Ms. Hughes Scandies is not here, and so I think it's Ms. Wall.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move the Assembly adopt ordinance 2024-01BN, an ordinance appropriating $100,000 to the manager for expanded inundation maps and hydrologic modeling of the Mendenhall River, and I ask for unanimous consent.
Any objection? Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Objecting for the purpose of actually just 2 questions. I'll start with the first. Manager Kester, would you just confirm to me that whoever is reviewing proposals or scopes of work, does that include local, or I guess, technological or, technical experts in the fields, beyond city staff? Or they're advising?
Ms. Kester.
Yeah, thank you. So the team right now that's putting together that scope of work is our local DOT hydrologist and engineers, and in conjunction with city staff. But really, we've leaned a lot on DOT for this work just because they have more experience with it. As of now, we're really looking at kind of breaking up the work into 2 separate chunks. So we're looking at doing kind of a phase, and the first phase being getting information, just basic information, kind of as quickly as possible so it can help inform our immediate flood fighting needs. And then we're looking at issuing a second RFP that would have a more robust, actually issuing an RFP. Let me clarify. The first piece of this would likely be sole source just because of the need to get some data very quickly. And that review will include not only local experts from the Department of Transportation, but also the Army Corps of Engineers, because any study or modeling that we do, we need to make sure is work that they can use for any future project. So they need to be able to use it, whether they're advising us on flood fighting in the future or whether they're advising us on long-term solutions. We do not want to have to go back and redo this work. So that's another partner that we're including.
Thank you. Follow up, Mr. Smith?
It's a separate topic. Well, I don't see another hand, so I'll ask again if that's okay. Thank you for that, Manager Kester. I guess my other question was just, I don't know how often we're expecting to have to be doing this inundation and hydrological work, and I guess just for me to kind of keep in mind, like, is this an expense that the CBJ will continue to bear, or should we expect support from other agencies?
Yeah, I think, ideally we would be actually using Army Corps funding for this through their Silver Jackets program. That they are the organization that did the first inundation maps up to 16 feet. And we are kind of expediting this because of the need to have this information, before the Army Corps gets funding and then gets funding approved by Congress and then is able to do that work. So I do think that traditionally this work would have federal funding partners. I can't promise that there wouldn't be a need for kind of emergency hydrological studies in the future, just given the fact that the Mendenhall is so dynamic and so young. But I do feel like this is definitely a one-off given the extenuating circumstances.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I remove my objection.
All right, thank you, Mr. Smith. Mr. Kelly, you have an objection?
Yes, just for the purposes of following up on Mr. Smith's question. So since typically this might be funded through the Army Corps of Engineers, but we're expediting it this year, is there a possibility of us getting reimbursed this year?
Madam,
Not to my knowledge.
Thank you.
all right, do you remove your objection?
Yes.
Any further, let's backtrack. Any objection? Seeing none, this motion passes. Just quickly, little quickly before we leave, I'll just say a quick comment, and then Madam City Manager can correct me if I get anything wrong. This year, the flood is so much different than last year. Last year, we were very dramatic, and it was more considered erosion rather than a flood. So a lot of the funding sources that we're looking at today were not the same as last year's. And without the National Disaster Declaration, we just did not have a huge amount of places passed to go forward with, and it didn't rise to the number of houses, having almost 300 houses, and the fact that it happened, or an incident happened again, is making people more interested in us, especially the Army Corps of Engineers. So it's just two different things, and now people are paying attention because it's happened and 300 houses were involved. So, Madam Manager, do you have anything else to add on that?
No, very well put. And of course I say no and then keep talking. I mean, last year we were largely looking at a bank stabilization project, which would have been the wrong project for this year's event.
Yep. So I appreciate Mr. Singletary's comments, but it was just a little bit different. And I believe, although we could look at this later, I believe Public Works, I know a couple of you said that, did look at this a little bit last year. So there just was a different event though. So Madam Manager, do you have anything further? I know some people are trying to get off at 1. So all right, with that, we are adjourned. Thank you all for making time for the special meeting.